Welcome to my workshop. In today's video, a little bit of a different type of a project. I'm gonna be making two lamps. Okay, my brother asked me to make them for him and gave me some guidance and inspiration of how they should look and more or less the sizes and everything else. The edges of the lamp, they need to be a little bit rustic, okay? So they need to be showing through the base layer, which is, in theory, the wood. Okay, they're going to be quite tall, and for the tall part I want to use MDF, okay, as it's stable, it's cheap, and it paints quite easily. However, the base and the top and the decorative elements, that will be from wood. So I've got some hardwood, I've got some ash over here, I've got some dark ash strips that I'm going to use to create the nice look of it. So you may ask the question why I'm not actually using MDF for the whole project. Well, as you know, if you do paint the edges of MDF, it's very, very hard to get a perfect finish surface on an MDF due to the way it's made. Okay, you can do many things to prevent it, to have a smooth finish, but I think you're still going to be able to see the difference, okay, regardless of what you do. And I don't want to put 20 layers of paint. So for the main body of the lamp, these will be jointed at 45 degrees, so they will not be showing the fuzzy edge anywhere. However, the base, the top and the decorative elements of the lamp, well, there isn't really a way to avoid the fuzzy edge. Yeah, you can probably try to miter every single corner, but that's not time efficient and it's not easy. Therefore, for those smaller parts, smaller pieces, I'm actually going to be using wood. So yes, it's going to be a bit of an experimental project today, and I've got a few tricks up my sleeves that I want to use to see if the whole thing will actually work or not. So first of all, what we're going to do, I'm going to cut the MDF to the right sizes for the main body, for the leg of the lamp. First of all, I'm going to be changing the angle on my table saw to 45 degrees. The MDF I'm using, that's 12mm in thickness. Now, truth to be told, you can use plywood for this, and then you wouldn't have any issues with showing a wood colour through the paint as you distress it a little bit. However, plywood, the prices of it is absolutely horrendous, and as I said at the beginning of the video, I want to keep the cost of this build to as low as possible, but still get decent results. Now, the width of these boards, it's 8 centimeters. However, the length needs to be at 47.5. As you can see, I'm going to be using my miter saw to cut them to the right lengths, and I've set up a quick stop block to make sure every single piece is exactly the same length. With all the pieces now sorted, what we need to do is to glue these together. And to do this, I'm just going to be using my painter's tape to hold everything together and actually add a bit of pressure to this. I'm not going to be clamping this down. Obviously, wood glue, if you are doing a similar project to this one, what you may consider is adding some additional hardware to it to make sure the rigidity of this. However, from my experience, to be honest, the glue itself is usually more than enough to actually hold the project together. And I think in this case will be exactly that. I'm not going to be adding any brad nails, any screws, anything like that. I just believe in my glue that it will hold together well. And with this ready, I'm going to leave it for the glue to set. The glue has dried, now time for a bit of cleanup. I'm using grit 80 to clean up our MDF glue ups. So that's the main body of our lamp, and I have to say it came out beautifully. 45-degree angles, the miters came out with no gaps at all, and just using tape to hold it in place, beautiful finish on the edges. So now it's time for the next step. And what we're going to be doing, I'm going to be cutting out bases for these. Okay, so I've got this piece of ash, dark ash, beautiful piece of timber. and that's how it's gonna be. If you want to make these lamps for yourself, the dimensions for the base is 17.4 centimeters by 17.4 centimeters. So we basically need 2 squares, and the thickness of the base, that's 2.5 centimeters. Now it's time to cut out the tops for our lamps, and I'm going to be using again dark ash, 1 centimeter in thickness, and the squares themselves, they need to be identical to the footprint of the MDF base. Now, to make sure these tops from ash will be exactly the same footprint as the MDF, I'm actually going to be cutting them out 1 millimeter larger, and then I'm going to use a flush trim router bit. Now, the best way to actually attach both of the pieces together, as we're going to be flush trimming it, is using a bit of painter's tape and CA glue. So a bit of CA, and it should hold our square just nicely. With my pillar drill and some Forstner bits, I'm going to be creating some holes. First of all, in the base, to allow a power cable, power lead to go through. In the base itself, I'm actually not going through. I'm not going to have an open hole inside. I'm just going to go about 3/4, maybe 80% down through the thickness of the board. For that, I'm using 40mm Forstner bit. And with that done, it's time to pre-drill a hole in the top as well. This time the hole needs to accommodate a 20mm aluminium pipe that will be holding the cables inside, and it will become a feature of these lamps. I'm pre-drilling a hole to accommodate the power lead that will come out through the side. Okay, so we are connecting the outside and the middle of the base itself. That will allow us to have a neat place for our power lead without any issues. Okay, our lamps are slowly coming together. Now what I want to do is to use a strip of, again, dark ash to do a nice wrap around the top and at the bottom as well. I think it's going to add really interesting looks, and that's what my brother wanted. I'm going to miter join them at the bottom and at the top. And in that exact way, I've cut out 4 pieces that will wrap around the base, just like so. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing for the other lamp, and I'm going to do the same thing for the top of the lamp as well. And with my bandsaw, I'm going to be cutting out a shape I want to add to the decorative elements of this lamp. Now, if you don't have a bandsaw, you can just use a normal handsaw to cut these out with no issues at all, or maybe a jigsaw or a scroll saw. Okay, finally we've got all the pieces cut out. Now it's time for a bit of cleanup and sanding. After that, we're going to start putting things together. Now, the way I'm going to be connecting the pillar to the base itself is by gluing both of pieces together. However, from the bottom, I also want to add some screws to make sure I've got nice and strong connection with the base and the main body of the lamp itself. Go around, make sure you've got equal spaces and the pillar is right in the middle. Trace the outline. And I'm just going to pre-drill some holes for screws that we'll install later on. Now it's time to put all the pieces together. I'm just going to be using wood glue. Don't think there's any need for any more additional hardware to this. However, if you are doing a similar project and you feel that additional hardware is required, then by all means use it. But from my experience, I can tell you that wood glue in most cases is just strong enough to hold your project together and last for a very long time. And in a similar way, we're going to glue in the bottom pieces on the main body of our lamp. For glue-ups of these types where you do have right angles, you know, sometimes it could be difficult to clamp down. So what I'd suggest, these spring clamps, absolutely fantastic for these types of jobs. And best of all, these clamps are not expensive at all. Right, let's talk about hardware a little bit, how everything will go together. So that's our hardware for the light bulb, okay? You can actually put the shade on it, and that's going to be sitting right at the top. However, I do want to have a piece of aluminium pipe, just like so, to get that a little bit higher. Let's say probably about 10 centimeters up. Okay, so I'm going to cut that to size. That's why we've got the hole there. Now, the way you're going to be actually able to attach this is with a threaded pipe. Okay, it does have thread just inside there to allow the wires to go through. So easiest way is to buy a threaded pipe. Okay, you do have an opening for the wires, thread on the outside, and basically you just screw that in and the wire, the power cable, will go inside of it. I do have this block of 18mm MDF that I've cut out, and I pre-drilled 2 holes. One from the top that goes about 3/4 in, that's 20mm in diameter, and then another one from the bottom that's 15. Basically what that will do, it will give a ledge for the pipe to rest on, and it's not going to go any further than that. So I'm going to glue both of these pieces together. That's going to go inside like that, okay? And I'm going to use a special washer and a nut to lock it in place. So let's glue both of the pieces together. I'm actually going to use a bit of wood glue here and a bit of CA for that bit faster bond, so I can start working with the next step. Now, to make sure this aligns properly, I'm going to use the pipe to center everything out, just like so. And I'll add some weight on top of it. Let it cure. I've established the length of the aluminium pipe that I need, and in my case it's 5.5 centimeters. All right, let's put everything together. First of all, the nut. So just whack it inside. And that threaded pipe needs to be sticking enough so we can put our hardware on top of it. So at the minute we need to release it a bit more. And there you go. We've got enough sticking out so we can add our hardware. And now from the other side, I'm going to add another washer. And in this case, I'm actually going to be adding 2 nuts. That will make sure the threaded rod will remain at the correct length as we're going to be adding the light hardware. And there you go. Not bad at all. Now what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to glue these tops in place. And I'm going to leave them to dry for a few minutes. Now, before attaching the base, what we need to do is to grab our power lead and thread it through. Otherwise, later on, it would be a very, very difficult job to actually do. And to attach both pieces, I'm going to be using a bit of wood glue, and then I'm going to come back with some screws. Okay, and more or less the lamp is now ready for a bit of paint. However, before we do that, as you know, we've got different shades of wood, we've got different type of material, we've got MDF, and I do want to get a rustic look to this. So the process, I'm going to paint this up, and the edges, I'm going to use a 240 grit paper to actually go through the paint so I can see the material beneath it. in theory, it should be wood. However, what I want to do, I'm going to add some wood stain to the edges of the wood and of the MDF. And hopefully, when I'm going to be sanding that through, that's what's going to be visible. But we'll see that later on when it's actually finished and if it worked or not. And it's time for a bit of painting. I'm using black, but it depends on what you want. You can use any color you wish. Okay, the paint has now fully dried. I'm going to be using, first of all, 120 grit to go over the whole body, and then with that 120, I'm going to break those edges so I can actually see the bare wood underneath it, okay, as I do want that look. When that's all done, I'm going to probably repeat this process about 2 more times. Alright then, so I'm 3 coats in. I think that's absolutely enough. I do have a beautiful, perfect finish. And now the final step in that is 320 grit paper. And I'm going to do those edges so it will add that nice rustic look to it. Now you may consider adding a bit of protection to these lamps, all down to you what you want to use. Maybe a bit of varnish, spray varnish, or like in my case, I'm just going to add a bit of furniture wax. I'm going to add it on, leave it for a few minutes, and I'm going to slightly buff it out. Now I'm going to install the hardware itself and wire everything up. Now, as I am not a trained electrician, I'm not going to take you through the details of how to actually connect everything up. If you do have the knowledge, you can do it by yourself, no issues. However, if you're not sure, I would ask a qualified electrician to help you out with this step. I'm also going to install a switch, as you do need to have the ability to actually turn this on and off. Now I do have this absolutely gorgeous bulb, and I'm going to use it to test out if our lamp is actually working at all. Let's have a look. There you go. Absolutely gorgeous. And there you have it, guys. Absolutely fantastic result. I'm pleased that it works, and it's exactly the look I was going for. So as you can see, following a different type of process, mixing up materials, but still achieving a end result that, well, you're not going to be able to tell that this is MDF, that's wood. You know, sometimes mixing the materials could be beneficial depending on the project. And in this case, I think it was the right way to do this. It saved me a ton of money on the material for the main body, and I was able to use some scraps I had lying about in the workshop. Think about projects that you want to tackle and different types of materials you can actually use for them to save a bit of money and actually make it a little bit easier for yourself, as using nice straight MDF was definitely a lot easier than trying to mill a piece of timber at that size and that length. At this point, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to my Patreons for the ongoing support. And before you go, check out these 2 cool playlists, plenty of videos there, click on them and maybe you'll find your next video to watch. For today, that's all. Thank you so much. Take care.